All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and get it started here. We can get some of the things out of the way here. So we can have a roll call, please.
Mr. Egan?
Here.
Ms. Lasky? Mr. Jeff Dance?
Here.
Mr. Becker?
Here.
Goodman? Here. Mr. Adam Dance?
Here.
Manistee?
Do we have an approval for the agenda?
I'll make that motion.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No one on for public comment, I'm assuming?
No.
Okay. All right, and we have the minutes, from the last meeting that you've had a chance to take a look at. Any changes to that? The official end of the meeting was as soon as we fell below a quorum, in case you're wondering about the time of the adjournment. But we did sit around and talk for a good while after that. All right, do I have a motion?
Make a motion to approve it.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, so now, that takes us to the treasurer's report. And I don't know if we're going to, hey Cindy. I don't know if we're going to try to get Susan on the phone or not. But you do have all of that information here, so.
Why don't we try, and we can't in 30 seconds or so?
Sure. Okay.
I'm trying to get all the, you go through these things so fast, I can't get them up on the screen.
Hey, efficiency, what can I say?
She said she's working on it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, do we want to move ahead and come back to the treasurer's report? Because I don't want to run over her if she's doing something.
That sounds good.
Okay, if that's cool with everybody, let's move on. There really is not a whole lot to talk about with the committees. None of the committees met. I am going to have to get together with you guys, though, on a transition committee meeting over the next week or two. So we'll call around and find a time that works for y'all, and I'd like to get the meeting hunt on the phone with us as well. So we might even be able to just do that as a Zoom. You think that'd be okay, Barry, with them?
That's fine, yeah.
Okay, that might be a good way to go at this point. All right.
Just since I know the budget committee didn't meet, but on Friday, the county had its budget work session, I believe is what it was called. So I did present the draft budget request that the board had approved last month at that. And I believe tomorrow is the county commissioners meeting to attempt to wrap up all of that discussion that they had on Friday. So there's some movement there, but nothing yet. Although depending on obviously what county budget adoption is, we then next month will have to approve our final budget, and there obviously may be changes depending on action at the county level.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Was there any comment from the county during, from your
Jeff
presentation?
had stepped out at that point because he had another meeting, so I'll let Karen speak to that.
I don't really think there was probably much debate or discussion.
I was at the very end of
Yeah.
the meeting, so I think everyone was tired at
I
that
think
point a little bit.
you also just were pretty clear about, what the additional money would be for and the benefits it would bring to the airport. I just kind of reminded everybody about the importance of supporting the airport and growing our airport. And we're kind of at that cusp where we can kind of start to see that, change coming, but we have to invest.
So
Is the 22.5 for something specific? Is it a match? What is it?
It essentially helps us cover our projected match.
Projected match.
And that.
Okay, so if there is a match need that comes up, I'm fairly confident in saying we will cover that if that need arises.
Yeah, I don't know how far it would get in a budget process, but it could be in a supportive process.
Historically, we have done that.
Right.
If something comes through and there needs to be for that 2.5%, we will.
And as, I've mentioned this before, but Aaron heard it, is we're being guided by the state that they won't be able to fulfill their half of the match for certain funding pools. So of the 22.5, that's about 15,000 is due to that. The other is just the size of our projects that are currently going on that project a bigger need this coming year than in past years. So that's the status of that. The other thing for the rest of the board members is this is kind of where the airport is fitting in. So the county discussion is mostly around increasing sheriff deputies, public safety need, and then what level of salary adjustments for non-union staff. Those are kind of the two decisions they have to make, which pushes them into a negative budget. That's common in their budget process, but the amount is maybe a little bit more this year, and us coming in as kind of another wild card in that are kind of the decision points that are being discussed.
And just to add to that also, our healthcare costs came in at 22.4% higher than the previous year. And there's been adjustments made to the healthcare plan that I anticipate the board will adopt that will keep that down to around a 7% increase.
Wow.
That are not painless for the employees.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess my question is, if the county board does not approve our budget as presented, and then we come back here, then we adjust to whatever the county does. But how do we move forward with whatever our projects are that we intend to do without having a portion of budgeted funds for them?
So there are two decision points at the county level that impact our budget, or potentially impact our budget. One being this requested allocation, the other being the percent wage increase, because typically my contracts get awarded basically the same level of wage increase as the county passes on to other similar employees. Our draft budget has 3%. That is one of the numbers that's on the table at the county level. If it comes in less than that, and this board decided to follow that general rule of thumb, that would lower our budget expenses a little bit. But then the amount of necessary need would be there. Then I would say from a budgetary standpoint, we would just take that from an allocation from fund balance. That's how we present final budget. And then based on what Jeff has said, if we end up towards the end of the year where we need to tap into fund balance to cover those matches, we would then go through some process. Don't know how that would work to make that request before the end of the year.
We're not talking about day-to-day operations. We're talking about a match for a grant.
Correct.
If we're successful. That's what we're talking about.
Yes.
Two different animals.
And the budget that's been submitted is pretty lean. It's not like it's outrageous or anything, so I have the impression that a lot of commissioners aren't really worried about it. it is this 22.5. That was kind of like, where's that gonna come from? But I don't think you have to put it in the budget. I do think it's an ability to have it out there. If you need it, then we can kind of work on it. That's my impression.
I guess my question is, you guys nix it, you keep our operating budget the same. We want to move forward with capital projects. We need 22.5 as a match.
Yep.
We now are operating in an environment where we have capital projects, but no available funds in our budget for them. So we have to go back to the county on a one-time
If it's
request.
successful, if the request is successful, yes.
Right.
The day-to-day operations is not, and there is an increase in the budget from last year as well.
That's fine. I'm asking for the process of how we request and where the available funds are at the county to come up with 22.5 for a match. I think that was Barry's question. How does that process look for
And
us to
Gary,
request it?
Barry would contact Lisa, you know, kind of have that conversation. It can come to the board for discussion, but it would probably go to Ways and Means.
Well, I think it would first come to this board
Well, yes,
for discussion.
I'm talking about commissioner side.
Then
Yep.
we would make, this
Yeah.
board would decide to make the ask, and then we'd figure out what that process would be.
That would go to Ways and Means, and then that recommendation would come to the full board. And as in the past, historically, then we would grant the 2.5% match for whatever grant request is. So that's, you know, you don't need a wish list for a grant in the budget when you don't know if the grant is coming or not. And if it's to cover a piece of the state that's not gonna be there, that's another unknown. It may be there.
So there's funds in the county budget for it?
We have fund balance that if we need to tap, we can tap. Yes, there is. Is it in the budget as we know it today? No. There's a kitty over there, that's the fund balance, that if we need to pull that 2.5 match, we can access that.
Well, I guess what's really at the heart of my point on all of this is we could be competing with other county departments going forward. And whatever's in the kitty gets eaten down by every other county department as they come in for some grant. I assume this is not the only body that has grant requests.
I mean, there's only a very few
Yeah.
that have that. You know, I can only think of like three different departments that came up, and that was for, you know, like new equipment for scanning and stuff like that. And those were handled in a different, there was an not equipment, but their overrun money, I don't know where we put that, but it was, every department had it. So I'm not as worried, because that's also back there, but the general fund monies that we have, fund balance, not general fund, that's CMH talk, but fund balance money that we have is for this type of stuff. So I feel pretty confident it'll be okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't see you competing with a lot of, the only one probably in the last couple of years has been the jail. Really, I can't think of anybody else that last year that's needed anything.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else?
I just want to
This
say
is committee, so.
also too, just, after that presentation, I knew where you're coming from, I'm supportive of I just kind of feel like if we don't have to put it in there, I think it would be better. I think having the ability to come over and take the stash over here, I just had this feeling like, want more money, kind of attitude. Just, that was my gut feeling going out of there. So, not having to throw it in there, but have something available over here, I think, be an easier pill to swallow. I don't know. It's not I didn't think it was a lot of money, but
It's not a deal breaker. It's just,
right.
there's no sense in allocating it and putting it out for basically putting it in the budget here for general fund dollars on something we don't even know if is gonna happen. That's the
General
difference.
fund dollars here, it's grant match here.
The grant
But
match,
yeah.
there again, the grant match may not be needed.
Right.
Mhm.
I think the point is that if the grant match isn't needed, we still have the dollars, so then it becomes it adds to our general fund, which I would argue we need to be building up anyway, but that's a different conversation. And I think it's, being at the end of a meeting where there are other important priorities that have been struggling for years to get funded, it's maybe not the best time to be having the conversation, in a difficult year with the health insurance, increases that they're having to deal with. So I'm happy with where things are coming out, but I did mention that when we get down the road a couple of years and do our taxiway, that's gonna be about a $200,000 ask. So that's the one that will be material,
Yeah.
and so I snuck that in just, it's not the first time I've mentioned it at the county level, but it's just, I don't want it to be forgotten because all these things tie together. Because we don't get 10,000 employments, because we don't get a guaranteed million each year, our ability to predict when a project will happen and get funded is much more in question. And therefore, it makes it hard to predict cash flow needs for things like matches, because we don't know if that'll happen next year, or 3 years from now, or 4 years from now. But the county would like to know, but we don't, and that's where growing helps us.
And you're right, getting a better fund balance here too. I mean, it should be growing. We saw some pretty hefty ones. And the board usually likes not to have too big a fund balance and then ask for more money. But
Okay.
I do agree that it needs to be increased here. We should think of that moving forward.
Good.
Our fund balance is up, to 31.2%, that's up significantly, and we've got $4.8 million in the fund balance sitting there. So we've got money sitting there if needed.
Yeah.
See if we can hear her. It looks like she's now in twice. Both from the phone and from her iPhone.
We got into a thing with the schools a few years back where we had built up a pretty big fund balance at Benzie. And so the State Department of Education said, well, you got all this money, so
Right.
they just cut it.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
boy, that was a rug right under
Yep.
the feet.
Any type of governmental entity or education, it's not great to have a big fund balance because they'll start whacking on you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we hear you, Susan. Can you hear us?
Okay, perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
I do. You guys have
Okay.
some questions for me?
That probably wraps up.
It
that
does,
item.
yeah. All right, so we're at the accounts payable. Any questions? Anyone have of Susan while we have her on the phone? And she is busy, so I don't want to keep her around too long.
What's the drinking water testing on the first page?
So that, is a GSA, General Services Administration, who manages the lease for TSA here. They came out with a new requirement this year. They amended our lease. Apparently they can amend it without us approving that amendment. Basically requiring some extensive drinking water testing for all facilities they lease across the country. But they're paying for it. So, but we had to jump through hoops and deadlines and get that done. So that is what that payment is to Mead and Hunt. We, chose to do that and then submitted that for reimbursement from GSA.
Anyone else? Do I have a motion to, approve the accounts payable, the general fund?
So moved.
Second.
And that's a roll call.
Mr. Egan?
Yes.
Mr. Jeff Downs?
Yes.
Mr. Becker?
Yes.
Ms. Goodman?
Yes.
Mr. Adam Downs?
Yes.
Kaminsky?
Yes.
Do we have any motion with the, capital improvement fund?
There was, nothing in there, so you're good on that one.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I forget, do we still need to approve that, even when there's no
No,
activity?
there was no activity, so no. Mm-mm.
All right, that takes us then to the financial statement.
So
Questions?
you should have the revenues and expenditures there for July, showing you last year at this time and then what's going on right now. There is the negative 11,000 at the bottom of the July 24th column. That's basically due to those two, there was the PFAS expenditure, and then there was a miscellaneous PFC. I'm trying to remember what that was, Barry, but I know that's a reimbursable.
Right. I don't remember what it was off the top of my head either at this point.
Yeah, but those are both reimbursable, and so then, if you took those away, you would have been in the positive. So I just wanted to point that out. Everything else looks fine. If anybody had any questions on anything.
Okay, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second. Okay,
Mr. Egan?
yes.
Mr. Jeff Downs?
Yes.
Mr. Becker?
Yes.
Ms. Goodman?
Yes.
Mr. Adam Downs?
Yes.
Ms. Kaminsky? Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep, and then did you guys talk about the budget at all?
Yes, we spent a little bit of time talking about that. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, that board meeting's tomorrow, so I'm trying to put, that's what I'm trying to do today. Don't have much time. I will, in my options that I'm giving the board, I will include that option on that, and, hopefully we should have an answer for you guys for that additional that you wanted, tomorrow, so that way you guys could finalize that budget between now and your next, meeting, but you could also finalize your budget in your September board meeting, as it just has to be finalized by September 30th.
Okay,
So that actually is a good point. Since there may be changes, do you want the budget committee to meet and review that before the next meeting, or do you just want?
I don't, if the board approves that additional, Barry, I don't think there'll really be any changes, right?
Well, potentially there is, if the salary adjustment gets approved at
Mhm.
less than 3%, we probably
Okay.
would adjust ours accordingly. So
Okay.
those
So
there are
there's
those
such
two
minor
things that-
ones.
They're both minor.
I would, right, I would just recommend, presenting it at the board, in September, since they're just minor changes, and then the full board could just approve that, and then it would be finalized instead of getting everybody together for a meeting that's literally probably gonna take you 3 minutes.
Okay.
okay, thanks.
Yep.
Susan, I was trying to go through my notes from the budget study, and I couldn't come up with
Oh,
it.
yeah.
We actually increased, if I remember right, it was an extra 10,000 in the standard budget for the airport, correct?
Right now, I don't know what it's 150,000, I believe, is what's in there
That's the
right
number I'm
now.
remembering.
And I believe that's.
Yeah, that's been approved for sure. And then the additional 22,500 is what, the board will have to decide tomorrow when we're going through things.
150 is last year's allocation as well, so there was not an increase there.
No.
There was an increase last year over the previous year, though.
Okay. So I will be adding that to the request for tomorrow's board meeting for the 22,500 with my 7 different options that I have to present to the board tomorrow. But I will include that so they know where everything's at, including that number.
All right. Thank you.
Okay?
Anyone else?
You're welcome.
Okay, well, hate to say it, but back to work.
Yep, thank you, guys.
Bless you. All right, takes us to old business.
On the agenda for it.
All right. So, new business, start off with the marketing plan that you and I talked about a couple of days ago.
So, the plan was to have Right Side Design here presenting a marketing plan of how we're going to be promoting our new carrier, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, there's some issues with that at the current point in time. Brandon did actually put together a couple of pages, but I decided he couldn't be here, and it just, there's not enough content there to really waste paper on. So this is less about marketing plan and more just a discussion about marketing, where we are in our fiscal year and where we are with our carrier selection process. So in the current fiscal year, we have a budget of $20,000, and some of the basic things we do, we've spent probably $2,500 of that, leaving roughly $17,500 unspent in the current fiscal year. That is partly by design. We were planning on saving it all up and doing a big push to promote new carrier as they started service October 1st. Again, fiscal year ends end of September. Right now, we can't really do that because we don't know what we say. But at the same time, we're starting to see a drop-off in bookings because there's uncertainty, fear, doubt in the community as to what's going on post-October 1st. So our plan, working with Brandon, is to start spending some money and just kind of a generic message, fly local, free parking, not mentioning carrier, probably mention Chicago O'Hare since the options all include that, but not specifically marketing any carrier. But we're not going to spend all of our budget doing that. So what the recommendation coming from Right Side Design is that we enter into an agreement with Lamar and basically procure billboards, roughly $1,000 a billboard for 1 month, so say $12,000 of billboards to give us 6 months of coverage. And if we have a new carrier, we'll use those to be promoting the new carrier over the next 6 months. If we have Cape Air, we'll not have Cape Air put up their billboards, and we'll basically be paying for Cape Air billboards, and then they can use those dollars and direct them in other places to market that service if that were the outcome of the DOT process. So Brandon wanted to make sure that the board was comfortable with us basically, because normally we don't do billboard advertising for the airport, but it's essentially a good way of utilizing our remaining budget in a way that gives us flexibility, tweak the message in an environment where we don't know what that message should be over the next period of time. So that's kind of the idea that's here.
Yeah, I know, we've talked about this, and it's hard for me to get my head around exactly how this all works. So I just anecdotally then, Cindy wants to go out west for a, something she wants to go to in February. She would love to fly in and out of Manistee. What should she do right now? See, you're in my mind here. That's my confusion. And if we put a billboard up and someone wants to go somewhere in January, February.
Who do you call?
Sounds like a great idea. What do we do?
Typically, the new carrier will work with the old carrier and work and address all of these future bookings in a way that is as convenient as possible for
Well,
the
that,
passenger.
well, that I can comprehend. Once a new carrier
No,
is
I'm saying
there.
all the existing ones, to basically reaccommodate them onto
The new carrier.
the new
So-
carrier. The only potential gotcha is if you're connecting
Mm-hmm.
at a time that doesn't match well with the new schedule, and there's not availability of another flight on your connecting carrier that would work, that's when you potentially have run into issues.
Okay.
I would say if it's American or United connections, they've got enough frequency out of O'Hare unless it's an international flight or it's about one flight a day type flight. But anything domestic, they're gonna have multiple options and they'll be able to reaccommodate, and it should be fairly seamless. If it's a two-ticket scenario where it's some other carrier, those I would not recommend booking at this point, because those become harder to reaccommodate if there's a mismatch in timing of that. If it's just a flight to Chicago, that will happen completely seamlessly. It may be at a different time,
Right,
again,
sure.
because 4 flights versus 2 flights a day will obviously impact that to an extent.
So
So
someone.
there's not a 100% answer that says it will be perfectly fine for everybody. For the majority of cases, it'll be fine. There may be a flight rescheduling, but that can happen on just any carrier. You can be notified 3 months before, oh, your flight's been rescheduled, here's the new time. If that doesn't work for you,
All right.
we'll refund you.
But right now, we're telling people to keep booking with Cape Air for there has to be some Cinderella clause to that somewhere.
Well, again, the process at the EAS level is that Cape Air will be required to continue providing service until the new carrier can start. Obviously, a notification of who the new carrier is the first step in that
Yeah.
process. Once that happens, then the 2 carriers will communicate and come up with the dates, and then DOT will basically issue the hold-in order up until that date, once all of that's settled. I
Okay.
actually had this conversation with Cape Air this morning, just trying to understand, make sure that my understanding was correct, and Andrew Bonney confirmed that process. But realistically, at this point, 6 weeks out from October 1st, we're going to have Cape Air here at least an additional 30 days, if not 60 days. And that's assuming DOT actually does something sooner rather than later. If DOT
Right.
waits another 3 months, well then, so this period of fear, uncertainty, and doubt starts essentially now and continues really until that day that new carrier starts service.
Okay.
And it could be, at this point, I'd say, best case 2.5 months, worst case more than that. I know that's not a perfect answer, but it's the answer.
Okay.
How much are bookings off that we're trying to solve a problem?
Right now, I'm seeing a downturn in October on the order of 10 to 20%
Over last year.
over last
Under-
year.
or under last year.
November's more like 40%. Now, the farther out you get, the fewer the bookings are. So those are, I mean, in November, being down 40%, you could make that up. That's not a problem. October, not as much. But to date this year, Cape Air has been up 18%. So seeing a downward trend is the opposite direction of what we've been experiencing really through September.
And are we comparing pre-bookings or actual flights?
This is pre-booked.
Okay, so
This
as
is-
of
As of
today, last year, gotcha.
Right, what we're seeing booked in November at this point.
To use your term, I think you had 3 words together, fear, uncertainty, and doubt or something.
But
Whatever, okay.
acronym for it.
I don't know how a billboard that says Fly Manistee works to address fear, uncertainty, or doubt, because Mike's question, I think, is spot on, completely remains no matter what we put on the board. Additionally, I think the best way to cure fear, uncertainty, and doubt is give the customer an answer that we just don't have. Maybe we'll get an answer in light of our letter and things here in a month. So, second thing is I don't know how effective billboards are in relation to all the other, methods of communicating, search engine optimization, web-based, social media, et cetera. And before we make a marketing commitment of about 50% of our marketing budget, maybe we should wait a month.
Well, but if we wait a month, we lose those dollars. The fiscal year will end, and we won't have spent it, and therefore the marketing dollars go away. So,
Well,
that is why we're looking at using the dollars we have budgeted this year to acquire a spend that gives us flexibility in how we spend it. And I would say over the last 3 years, while Cape Air has had their billboards up, it makes a difference. They're, I think, an expensive marketing option. There are other things that may be more effective, but it's not that they're not effective in making our message visible to our local population. It doesn't help people who live in Chicago a drive-through, but that's not, it's that frequency of people who live here seeing it day after day that is what makes them effective to a local audience.
Would we put it in Mason County?
We could, I mean, there's, again, all
Market.
we're potentially
Yeah.
doing is basically signing a contract with Lamar for a number of billboards. Where we put them, it depends on availability, you know, if someone else has locked in a billboard, that's the one we want, well, then we can't have it, and then, you know, so there are, it gives us flexibility, and it gives us something to use the dollars we've currently allocated. Now, the dollars don't get lost, it just builds our fund balance, and then, you know.
is our fiscal year September 30?
Yes.
So this could be acted on at the next meeting and still use them?
Yes, yes, yes. But we,
Great. Thank you.
the issue is that if there's an alternative idea to spend it on something else, it would most likely be too late at that point to do anything. So, but we don't have to make a decision on this at this time. We just need to take action before the fiscal year, so it makes sense that we're utilizing our budgeted dollars this year.
In theory, what we could do, tell me if this is within the realm of possibility, we could write a check to Brandon's company for our budgeted dollars and say,
Be continued.
to be continued, and gets it off our book, and we could say, all right, now we're gonna do billboards, we're gonna do search engine optimization, we're gonna do social media, we're gonna do all these things, and we're gonna execute this over the next year when we know when the fog lifts, what we're doing.
Yes,
Yeah,
in theory, I'm not sure how Susan would
Bookkeeping
react to that when it's kind of open-ended and we're buying something that's not defined exactly what it is, other than it's vague. But, yes, in theory, yes, I'm not the one to make that call as to what's.
Well, we could come back we've got a good working relationship with this guy, you could put together a one-page contract.
Yep, no, I'm sure there are ways to do
Deliverables.
that, and that is, we could do that still at next month's meeting. Assuming that we have an answer to the underlying issue by then.
Even if you don't.
Even if you
Still
don't, you still have a
provides
different.
the opportunity.
I guess Brandon probably feels a little bit uncomfortable with that as the solution to what we're trying to accomplish, and he wanted to propose something more concrete as opposed to being viewed as receiving funds in a way that,
I think it'd be nice.
I'm going in a direction that probably leads to people questioning more than anything there.
I mean, there is the bookkeeping piece of that, which has to be defined on what you're spending that on, but he could put something together, I think Adam said it,
liability
you know,
on his
here's some,
balance sheet.
no, it's a reporting for us. I mean, we'll get next too, but he can put those deliverables down, you know, we will, you know, review, you know, maybe 10, billboards and media, I mean, he can do that, like 4 or 5 things he could be getting that money for.
Generally, we don't prepay for
Yeah.
things, we
I get it.
pay for them after services
Yeah.
have been rendered.
Yeah, our CFO has a stroke when we try to do that every day. Ow! But if you have clarity in regards to the contract or whatever you write together, it helps a lot. Be able to put that in your books.
Yeah. What was the target date for getting those up?
Well, the target date was to get a contract with Lamar before September 30th, and then
Okay.
probably, well, Cape Air will essentially stop marketing as
Right.
of September 30th. Even
Right.
if they're held in, they're not gonna be still putting their name out, under those circumstances.
Mhm. Fair enough.
So it would be something to start off
Okay,
immediately in October.
okay.
And I think taking a breath a little bit, you know, when you just say put a billboard, I just felt like it was like, well, we don't know what else to do, let's do billboards.
Right.
And you know, it's like, I'm not a huge fan of billboards, so it just maybe gives him time to take a breath and kind of think a little bit broader.
Have us come up with a marketing plan instead of a contract to spend money for the sake of spending money.
Yeah, I'm worried about that.
Okay. I will take that back to Brandon
Yeah.
and we'll come back, pick up this conversation next month.
Okay.
And
Good
hopefully
deal.
have more information based on. Okay.
All right, and Barry, that takes us to you then.
Screen.
I cut my finger on a project, shouldn't that be reported in the accident?
No accidents or incidents to report this month. Just a little bit of update on our billboard lease agreement. As I mentioned last month, Wolverine returned theirs and signed. I've had a little bit of interaction with Lamar. They've at least acknowledged the new contract I sent them, but they want to talk with me about it. And Rainbow Bend is really intriguing. We've had multiple conversations with them. They told us that the check was in the mail, and 2 weeks later, we've received nothing. It's not technically the owners, but like their daughter that's handling this for them. Alyssa has actually reached out to them. She knows them and gave us, actually, I guess she gave the whole board an update on that.
Mhm.
Really odd what's going on there. They don't like writing checks. They're afraid they're gonna get stolen in the mail, and it's just, it's interesting. I'll just leave it at that.
There's alternatives.
Well, there's not a lot of alternatives when it comes to how we operate. Checks are like.
Well, they can drive it over here and drop it off.
Well, they're in Detroit, so
Oh.
it's not just
I
a,
trust their mail system down there.
Guess not.
so.
Like, that's safer than
So anyway, that's where that stands. We've actually made a lot of progress, but not at the finish line yet.
They just don't wanna pay anything.
So our airport inspection, so we had a deadline to submit all of our electronic records, by July 31st, and then the on-site inspection was August 6th. And we haven't really got feedback yet from our electronic records. We submit and then they review when they can schedule it in. Actually, I got an email over the weekend that I think is the feedback on that, or at least questions about it, but I haven't I didn't want to open it over the weekend. The on-site inspection went well. Couple minor issues, like our fire extinguishers, the monthly checks weren't signed off on. We'll probably get a ding on that. But overall, that went well. I'm very glad that's over. That 3 weeks up through the on-site inspection is always pins and needles. Just, when someone's coming in to look at how you do everything, you're always a little bit nervous. But overall, I mean, as I told the inspector, this is my 16th time of doing this. It's not sure I'm gonna be surprised by anything that comes up, so. And so that's that. The new door card reader system with TKS, I brought the board up to, last month on that topic. There's been back and forth, and basically their stance is that it's not their issue. We just need to pay them $11,000 more for essentially their mistake. I discussed this with Mike last week, and we're going to negotiate a potential resolution on that. So stay tuned on that. Employment, so this ties into some of the things we've talked about, and I've mentioned this to you before, but the next funding level for us is 8,000 employments. I was feeling fairly good that we could get there this year if we were able to convince the FAA to utilize our sightseeing flights. Broken it down a little bit more in numbers here. So last year, Cape Air did 6,000, give or take a little bit. They're currently up 18% through July. So if you extrapolated that growth through the rest of the year, that would give them just over 7,000. Orchard Beach in July did 350. Overall, I think we're on track for about 1,300. You add those two together, you're at almost 8,400, so that gives us a little wiggle room even. But this whole issue of uncertainty around what the carrier is going to be post October 1st probably is not going to help Cape Air achieve that growth rate to the end of their service. And will people, once we know who our new carrier is, will people have already booked out of other airports, and therefore we've lost them for this fall to the beginning of winter. So that is where it is. It's within reach. Now, if we get to that number, then we have to deal with convincing the FAA that these sightseeing numbers actually count. And again, that's kind of an argument to be held, but you don't have to do it until you actually have the numbers to make that worthwhile. I mentioned GSA earlier, since they sold the lease as it came into the financials on the water testing. Their lease currently expires September 30th. They have in the past, generally they do a 5-year lease, and generally they've just extended it another 5 years, changed the rates. I was notified a couple weeks ago that this time they're going to do a new lease for us and not just an extension. I haven't received anything from them yet, so that is out there, and I'm kind of waiting for them to send me the paperwork they said they were going to send me. We or me need to figure out what our rental rate for their space, their office space, will be for the next 5 years. That's always hard to anticipate. Well, what should we charge 5 years from now for rent? Because whatever we charge, we try to be consistent and charge the same rate to all tenants and not have tenant with a different rate for essentially the same space. But, until we get the paperwork, that's a moot point at this point. And then the last item here is to remind the board that my contract and the Orchard Beach contracts also expire on 9/30. We've routinely carried on month to month after that, and, you know, part of this ties into the conversation around, transition committee and things along those lines. Because my predecessor, when he was leaving, requested longer contracts for Orchard Beach so that there was essentially some certainty of selling the company that there would be contracts in place. I'm not sure that right now we're in a position to do that because that depends on the outcome of that committee. So I'm anticipating that we will, like recent years, just do a 1-year contract on this. But that should happen soon.
Well,
And I don't know who you want to be working on that from the board side.
well, we, you and I worked on that last year at some level. I remember bouncing it off of you somehow. These contracts, for some reason, are you the executive committee?
Okay, I'm on the executive
Yes.
committee.
I think
So
that's,
it'll be-
because I relied on someone,
That would be you, Alyssa, and
Yeah.
Jeff.
yeah. So we can bounce that back and forth, and, I don't remember there being a face-to-face meeting.
No.
We sent it, you brought me up to speed on a couple of things that, you know, I wouldn't know, and it was pretty quick, as I recall, last year, but I do remember getting it done on time.
I'm drawing a total blank on it, to be perfectly honest with
The
you.
only reason it sticks out to me is when I all of a sudden I was doing this job, one of the first things I realized was that we were like 4 months late on something, and so I got it done on time last year. And that's the only reason it sticks in my mind at all. But, I think you just got me the contracts with the updates highlighted in red. I think I sent them out. I don't remember there being any debate one way or another about it. You know, whatever those percentages were. So if you can just get those to
Which ties
me.
into what county board.
Exactly.
So there's a bunch of things tied together.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of the theme of this meeting is it all ties together.
Yeah, it does.
Gary, can't recall, but have you made a decision on how much longer you're gonna
So,
be in this role?
yes, so in January, I had the conversation with Mike, and I think
Mhm.
you mentioned it to the board in March,
Mhm.
that end of next year, so.
Mhm.
September
Kind of
of 25?
December. So I kind of, basically my intention was to give 2-year notice.
Calendar year.
Calendar year, yes.
But we are now a third of the way through that 2-year period.
So I think that's also a very important discussion that the board starts having in regards to session.
Right.
There is a committee that's assigned to start having that conversation.
Okay, so that's already happening?
Yes, and we had one quick meeting, and, Mead and Hunt is gonna be involved in this process. Do we keep it with the same format that we have right now? Orchard Beach and the exec position being kind of a connection there. And I feel good about having Mead and Hunt around because they're working through Escanaba right now. They're working through their new exec director. So that makes me feel good to have someone.
They've seen a lot of different operating models.
Yeah,
And either can provide information on them or, acquire information on them.
Yeah.
And as we've talked, I think the board needs a third-party
Mhm.
advice on this
Mhm.
because
Oh, yeah.
obviously I'm not the unbiased
Of course, yeah.
guidance that
Yeah.
you need.
And I appreciate that ethics.
Mike and Barry, I agree. I think it's great to have Mead and Hunt. One quick question. Do we have money budgeted for this coming fiscal year for their services for this?
Yeah, I asked about that, just a couple of days ago, and do you wanna take this, you want me to? Go ahead. It's, it really kind of, it ties in with their overall billing, that they build in just some time for us to call them and say, hey, can you help us with this? And so, and actually, within
Although,
some reason.
In this case, it might be something they would bill separately for, because it's more of a defined project as opposed to, what you're describing is, if the board has questions of Mead and Hunt, what's the answer to this? They wouldn't charge for that, but for a more well-scoped project, they might. But I don't know what the board or the committee is looking for from them, so until
I
that's
think that
defined.
probably is more like a retainer
Mhm,
you would have with a legal firm,
mhm,
where if you are asking them to supply documentation
mhm.
to support a new path, I would assume that probably would be different and more billable.
Right, and I think this is more just, all right, what's going on out in the world? You have access to these other operations that we don't. That wasn't the way I understood it to be, then. That's a little bit different than what I was
I didn't know when
perceiving.
you were asking that question that you were referring to this,
Yeah,
topic.
yeah, 'cause I had the same thought. I don't wanna run us in the hole with a whole bunch of advice billable hours that we need to be cautious about. But that's been my conservative approach to this, is not wanting to just spend money willy-nilly.
So, I think Mead and Hunt probably gives us an hour or two. I think if we want, to your point, Barry, about a defined scope of work, I think they probably bill for it.
I think over
Should we ask them?
I think over the course of a year, you've probably got 10 hours from them.
Yeah,
They can,
Mhm.
but if you want them to, if you basically put to them a question and say, research this, come back with a,
Yeah,
a document that says, this is our recommendations and here's all this, that's probably something that is.
Well, do we know what we want them to do? How we
You're
want
part of that committee, and I think at this point, that is not
So,
defined.
if we don't know what we want them to do, we cannot answer the question,
We can't.
are they gonna charge us or not?
Well,
And we can't budget for something we don't know what it is either.
as a committee, you need to maybe do your top 5.
it's pretty easy to tell them what we're looking at, 'cause they already know how this operation works. And essentially, we're just saying, do we keep it like this, or do we change it? So that, it's not like we're just making a cold call to them. I think they have a pretty good idea of what the question is going to be, and they're expecting the call already too. So,
But I think, as you mentioned at the committee update, you need to schedule that
right,
Zoom with them, have this conversation with Mead and
Mhm.
Hunt. They will then be able to provide you some guidance of, we can do X, Y, and Z, and this won't cost anything, this will cost this much, and this will cost this much more.
all right,
And then based on that conversation, you'll then have a number, and then we can talk about how it's paid for.
right, okay.
Is the situation with you and Orchard Beach unique to airports, or is it
It is, I would say, it is rare, but there are,
so we may be looking for two separate potential?
Helston has a model, Muskegon has a different model, Manistee does. They're all kind of in the same
Mhm.
realm where there's a third party that's kind of administering the airport that's separate from the underlying governmental entity. The majority airports are just operated by the county as a
Right.
department.
Isn't Bill the one that set this up before he left, or
I think it was,
during when he started, from when he started?
I suspect it was even before that,
Okay, all
when
right,
Dave Milkey was
okay.
here.
I remember it was a big talk before.
Well,
I remember there was
The general conversations have come up multiple times, because when the city withdrew from the airport authority, there was a large discussion at that time as to should the airport authority be abandoned, and should it just become a city department, and, so it was all kind of tied together as, different points in the history.
Yeah, I knew of one other airport that was like this, down south I used to fly out of, and, it was the same sort of setup. So this was a very familiar setup to me. But I also know that was 30-some-odd years ago, so.
And until a couple of years ago, Ludington was operated like this.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
Mhm. All right.
So then, already kind of at a high level talked about some of this, but our enplanement numbers for July, we did 1693, which is Cape Air's best month ever. That's now 2 months in a row where they've had their best month ever. June was their previous best. So, Cape Air is doing very well right now, through the summer. And it shows more than ever, some of the decision points in our recommendation to DOT is that we don't have enough capacity to meet the demand. And, so I'm saying Cape Air is doing well, but they're doing so well that we are being limited. That is very clear this summer. From a performance standpoint, 4% cancellation, which is good. They're generally shooting for 3 or less is kind of their overall goal, so it's a little bit more than that. To date this month, they didn't have a cancellation at all this month until Saturday. They had a couple mechanical issues on Saturday that led to a couple flights over the weekend canceled. So overall, Cape Air is doing well. Airfares. So changes in the last month have really seen fares come down a little bit at Manistee, a little bit more at Traverse City. In fact, Traverse City is actually pretty good right now. Grand Rapids has actually gone up, so the gap between Grand Rapids and others is narrower this month than is typical. Muskegon has roughly stayed the same. We're, from a just pure fare standpoint, we're not the cheapest in any market, but yet we're competitive in most. So throw in a little bit of extra expenses for parking with our free parking, and that lowers the playing field, even more. I mean, actually, from an overall average, it puts us at the cheapest on average of the 4 airports, but it's actually a fairly narrow range between. So capital projects, not really much has changed here. Our ALP updates, still haven't heard back from either the state or the FAA on that. Our overall big project that will require a big chunk of that matching funds that we talked about earlier in the meeting, that application for FAA discretionary grant funding was submitted on July 15th. Waiting for that process to wrap up. That's a process that will conclude before the end of the federal fiscal year, which is the airport's fiscal year, which is the county's fiscal year. So September 30th is, by September 30th is when we should have word that we've received that funding. Again, that project is bid, and we're basically just wrapping up the funding necessary to complete it. It would now be scheduled as a spring project. Meet and Hunts, when they were here last month, had indicated that we were supposed to have a meeting on the key hangar doors, that haven't reached out to me on that, since then, and I haven't told them either. These other things, the remarking crack sealing, that's a state contract. It generally happens in September and October. We're on it, the paperwork signed. It's just a matter of when I get a call and says, oh, we're gonna be here next week to do that work. Haven't heard it yet. Airport terminal improvements, that whole project is really contingent on contour and larger aircraft to be the justification of trying to go after those grant dollars, so that's on hold, pending the EAS discussion. Pavement inspection, again, a state program, and haven't heard when they plan to visit us. Again, that often happens September, October. Cape Air, already talked about most of this, but here's something that's interesting. So July was Cape Air's best month here. Overall, it was still only our fourth best overall July. We do not have enough capacity from Cape Air in July and August to meet our demand. Cape Air's load factor in July was 85%. Previously, on 5 occasions, they fell just short of 80%. 80% was like the glass ceiling, that everything goes good, and get just about 80% load factor. They did 85. What that means is there was so much more demand that was not being met, that even the flights that would normally not be full because of the timing, midweek, they were full, which means during the peak times, there was more demand than that was not being fulfilled. Looking forward, August will be trailing July a little bit. It is still projected to be higher than August of last year, and August of last year was, until June, Cape Air's best month. So they're improving year over year, but it will not meet the July number. Say that, and things could change in the next few weeks, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. We've already talked about how things start falling off at post-September because of uncertainty, but not much we can do about that. I realized, now that I'm at the end of my report, that we didn't have this on old business, but we probably should have had it under old business, and that's just kind of a Essential Air Service update. So I'll just talk about it here, since this is as good a point as any. Stop sharing, seeing all of us. So my inspection was August 6th. Left that inspection and immediately switched into EAS mode. That week, I was working on 2 different letters. One that I was basically helping Muskegon with, some information and research in their response to DOT to basically get movement on the overall issue, and then drafted a letter that finally emerged through the process this morning, and I'll let Adam touch on some of the things that have been going on there that he's been spearheading with congressional support on the Manistee area. In the Muskegon letter, so the end of that week of August 6th, I think that would have been the 9th, Muskegon sent their version of that letter in on Friday morning at just before 11. They had a meeting with Senator Peters' staff at 11, so they wanted that letter to be part of that meeting, but they had sent it in to DOT just before that meeting. Within a couple hours, that letter got posted publicly in the regulations.gov docket for Muskegon. And by 3 o'clock, I was getting calls from Contour, who had already received calls from their consultant that had noticed the letter. Matt had received calls from his employees who had read the letter in Muskegon. So within a few hours, that letter got wide distribution. So I hope it helps Muskegon get what they're looking for, and kind of as a byproduct, it helps us as well get what we're looking for. Through a lot of different pieces of information, because at this point, DOT can't really give us any information in any official capacity as to what their decision will be, because it's not been approved. So you get bits and pieces from every contact point. So from Muskegon's contact points, I've learned some things. From my contacts with DOT, I've learned some things. From congressional and senatorial contacts, we've learned some things. Contour has learned some things. The overall picture that I've pieced together is that DOT staff, those that generally I work with, have written the award over a month ago, essentially awarding both Muskegon and Manistee what we're requesting.
Mhm.
It is being held up at a higher level, so above staff in the area of the political appointees that actually are the ones that sign off on these awards. And as one version of the information I heard from Contour was that it has run into a detour at that level. What that means and what that detour is, but the fact that it is holding up Muskegon as well means that the decision is essentially between awarding Muskegon and Manistee what they're asking for, or forcing both communities to accept K-Bear against both communities' goals. So if you look at the differences in the awards, the difference really is all about the dollar amount. K-Bear was the lowest bid, providing the least amount of service, which is partly how they achieved that for both communities. So that's what we know, that's where that stands. I'll turn it over to Adam to kind of give an update on what he has done, and he can talk about the letter that was handed out earlier in this meeting, and kind of the background there and where that's going. And then, I don't know, Jeff, if you want to comment on Friday's meeting here as well at some point. I mean, I can also comment on that since I was attending. Adam first.
Coincidentally, where I work in Illinois, our congressman is Darren LaHood. Darren's father was the United States Secretary of Transportation under Barack Obama. And I saw Darren and talked with him about this matter, and he said, Adam, is a favor, as a courtesy, as a friend, I'll put you in touch with my dad, and you can speak with him and get his suggestion on what to do here. And so I had the opportunity to speak with the former Secretary of Transportation. And what he said is, particularly given the fact that staff supports Manistee's award to Contour, principal to principal, not staff to staff, but our congressman should write a letter to Secretary Buttigieg advocating for this, and it should be followed up with a personal telephone call from our congressman to the secretary. Additionally, even though there's two different political parties at stake, with Secretary Buttigieg being Democrat and Molinar being a Republican, he said, given Molinar's tenure in Washington and Molinar's committee assignments, transportation probably would want to get along with a guy on appropriations, us have our local congressmen do what they did. Additionally, to build a coalition of support, Congressman Bergman's constituents, in Benzie County and Leelanau, also use this airport. And so that's why you see 2 members of Congress signing the letter. Also, in an effort of bipartisan support for Manistee and Muskegon's request, Mullinar's office has reached out to Congresswoman Schulten's office, and this was kind of the first attempt, to get those 2 offices maybe have a call with DOT. I don't know that that will take place now because Mullinar has been willing to call the secretary directly, as opposed to staff. That's where it's at. But that's really, I think it's elevated to a principal's level, not a staff level. We already have staff support, as Barry said. So hopefully this helps. You see the language in the letter asking for quick consideration of this. The letter, notes of the timeline where Cape Air's contract expires. It notes there's twice as many seats, over twice as many seats that would be available. So when you look at the premium in absolute dollars, if you look at it on a per seat basis, it's actually more affordable, per seat. There's some economic justification here to do this. And, Barry shed a lot of insight into the points outlined in the letter. So it was nice that we were able to get 2 members of Congress to advocate on our behalf within a couple of weeks' time.
Do we have any sense that we may be, played with, politically out of Traverse City?
Barry, you can talk to that. I'll tell you what's, going back to April or May, whenever we voted as a board to go with Contour. Senator Peters' office, to date, to my knowledge, has not been willing to write a letter. I don't know.
For either us or Muskegon.
For either us or Muskegon. I don't know why. I know that other U.S. senators have written letters just like this for their local airports that have been included in the packet. Why Peters is not willing to do this, I don't know. I'm not even gonna speculate. Reckless.
And you had reached out to Peter's office early in this process.
Yeah, whatever it was, April or May.
And they said they wouldn't write a letter, but would make a call.
They would make a call. And that is staff to staff. And now, we've already got staff support, so for Peters to call the staff,
You lost somebody.
It's the same thing, yeah.
Well, and I talked to Senator Peters direct when we had him at PCA for the rail relocation. He said he could assist with that. But we have not seen any formal, other than them being on a call that I'm aware of. I don't know what else, if anything else.
Have we requested anything, like, what have you done? Can you send us a copy, or?
well, they said they would call, so
Yeah,
there's no
well,
real.
I want a follow-up. Did you call?
Yeah.
Well, so on Friday, part of Jeff's follow-up on the rail, their staff sat down here with me and we chatted, and Senator Peters is on the Senate Transportation Committee, so that is the relevant committee that oversees DOT and FAA and therefore all of the parties involved in this. And in addition to the local Traverse City-based staff person, also in attendance was Peter's DC transportation specialist,
Mm-hmm.
who I got the sense is fairly new into that position, and while knowledgeable about EAS, I don't think he knew a lot. Some of the things I mentioned to her, were news to her. But she had indicated that she's been, and so I mentioned earlier that Keegan got their letter out before their meeting. She was one of the people in that meeting at Muskegon, so she's aware now of both sides of this, and I could tell that she has been in contact with DOT staff, but I don't know if there's any advocacy going on, or if it's just getting status, updates at this point, so.
My sense is that you need a champion that's gonna advocate at the principal level, and you've got that here by this congressman calling the Secretary of Transportation, writing a letter. And anything short of a champion for your position could be perceived as, sometimes what you don't say says more than what you do say. And so I don't know about the dynamics at play in Peter's office.
Yeah,
Kind of more what I'm.
yeah.
Well, I think when you look at, the dollars, this contract is more than, Cape Air's.
Mhm.
And Denver Air was more than Sky West
Mhm.
in Muskegon. So Muskegon could have jet service less expensive with Sky West than it could with Denver Air. So if I were to guess, I would say there's a little bit of a premium here that is put forth. Now, better service, more seats, et cetera, yes. But they're looking at it probably cumulatively, what's the cumulative price tag between Manistee and Muskegon to award this? You saw in Barry's presentation, we're at capacity here, at least in the summer months. I think we would be served by more seats that would help us to hit our 8,000, and 10,000 and put more money, available to us for improvements here at the airport. I would give this a couple of weeks to work its way through the system, and then this is fresh as of this morning. The congressman can't just call the secretary and say, hey, I want to talk to you right now. So that's got to take a little while to schedule that call.
And I will see the Congressman Molinar on Wednesday.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Anything else?
Nope.
All right. We don't have anyone on for public comment now?
Nope.
All right. Anything else from anyone? All right. Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting right now then. Thanks.
Hey, Mike, while
Yes,
we're
sir.
here,